Welcome back, focused learners. I am so excited to jump into today's explainer because, well, we're doing something a little bit different today, but it is absolutely fascinating. We're going to literally deconstruct a terrifying fictional tale, an urban legend about two best friends, just to see exactly how horror is built from the ground up. Whether you're a huge fan of spooky stories or just someone who appreciates the structure of a perfectly crafted narrative, this explainer is going to show you the actual anatomy of fear. We'll be digging into the specific psychological triggers and those classic tropes that make a myth permanently stick in our minds.
Okay, I want you to just listen to this chilling cold open for a second. Anyone who enters the forest after midnight never comes back the same, if they come back at all. Just wow. That ominous warning from the village elders perfectly sets the stakes for our whole story. Notice how it doesn't just threaten death, right? It threatens transformation, a total loss of self. And that is a deeply, deeply unsettling concept. It establishes the rules of the world right out of the gate and basically places a giant, blinking, do not enter sign right in front of our two highly skeptical best friends, Adnan and Sikandar.
So let's dive into part one, the ignored worrying.
Because honestly, what good is a do not enter sign if literally no one walks past it? This perfectly illustrates the very first foundational block of any great myth, which is the tension of worldviews. On one side, you have Adnan and Sikandar. They represent the optimism bias of youth and logic. They love exploring abandoned places and flat out reject ghost stories. But pitted against them are the village elders, who carry the heavy weight of tradition, generational trauma, and a deep-seated fear of this cursed forest on the edge of town. It is a classic clash. When the boys just laugh off the warning, grab their flashlights, and set out to prove everyone wrong, they aren't just taking a midnight stroll, they are actively challenging the unknown.
Which brings us right into part two, the midnight forest.
So the physical journey here immediately shifts into a psychological descent. And look at how rapidly the environment turns hostile. Exactly at midnight, they step into the forest. We're talking to witching hour, right? The quintessential time for supernatural boundaries to thin out. Seconds later, the air turns instantly cold and a thick fog rolls in, completely blinding them and isolating them from the real world. Sensory deprivation, exactly like the sudden thick fog, is a classic psychological trigger. It essentially forces the human brain into a state of primal panic. And shortly after that, they start hearing a second pair of footsteps just echoing their own. The legend absolutely does not waste time here. It immediately attacks their senses and completely strips away their comfort. And from there, the environment actually begins actively manipulating them. The trees literally seem to be moving on their own, warping their sense of direction. Then the auditory horror kicks in with the eerie, echoing laughter of a child. This works so incredibly well because it subverts innocence. I mean, hearing a child's laugh in a place where no child should ever be is just profoundly unsettling. Then their flashlights, which are really their only tools of modern logic, flicker and reveal absolutely nothing. Finally, the narrative hands them a breadcrumb trail, a path of wet footprints leading to an old, hidden, completely abandoned mansion. It is a masterclass in stacking sensory details to lure Adnan and Sikandar deeper into the trap, until their curiosity ultimately overcomes their rising panic.
So, did you hear that? We're not alone. This is the pivot. The exact, precise moment youthful skepticism completely shatters and true, primal fear sets in. They aren't explorers anymore. They're prey. Let's look at part three, the trapped mansion. Following those wet footprints inside, the myth introduces its most terrifying element yet, a total and complete loss of agency. The physical space of the mansion defies all logic, actively trapping them inside a literal nightmare loop. And the sequence is just merciless. Step 1, bang. The front door slams shut, cutting off the outside world entirely. Step 2, an auditory invasion. A freezing cold whisper fills the hallway telling them you should never have come here. But step 3 is the true horror. When they eventually panic and try to flee, every single escape door leads them right back into the exact same room. The house itself is alive, basically folding space to keep them contained. And then they see her, standing right at the top of the staircase. A pale woman in a torn white dress, her long black hair completely covering her face. But she wasn't walking, she was floating. In horror architecture, this taps directly into the uncanny valley. It's imagery that is so close to human, but just wrong enough to scream to our brains that we are dealing with something profoundly unearthly. It completely subverts the natural laws of physics. While desperately trying to find some kind of way out of this impossible space, Adnan spots an old, dusty diary on a broken table. He reads the very last page, and we get this massive, chilling lore drop. Every visitor becomes part of this house. Their souls can never leave. In folklore, discovering the monster's secret is almost always the catalyst that springs the trap. Reading this isn't just uncovering some sad backstory, it's an action that actually triggers the physical climax of the story. The absolute second he finishes reading those words, the walls of the mansion begin violently shaking and dark shadows start crawling across the ceiling. The house knows they know the secret. So how do they get out? Let's dive into part 4. A desperate escape.
I mean, really, how do you survive when the environment itself is the cage? The ghost reappears, but this time she's not at the top of the stairs. She is only a few feet away. Her glowing white eyes are locked directly onto them. Her mouth opens, delivering this absolute peak of suspense. You belong to me now. It's just a direct, incredibly terrifying claim of ownership over their lives.
And here is where the story introduces its incredible countermeasure. Absolutely terrified, Adnan begins reciting verses from the Holy Quran. This introduces a powerful spiritual defense mechanism, which beautifully grounds the urban legend in real-world cultural and religious faith. This act of spiritual defiance fundamentally shifts the power dynamic. The recitation literally forces the ghost to scream in pain. The mansion shakes violently, the supernatural hold finally breaks, and the front door bursts wide open, allowing the two friends to run for their lives into the dawn. Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, The Lingering Curse.
Because, as we know, surviving the night doesn't actually mean you've escaped the nightmare. The next morning, Adnan and Sikandar return with the villagers, and the physical threat is completely gone. The mansion has vanished. There's no path, no wet footprints, no dusty diary, nothing. But they are left with a permanent psychological scar. Even though they never speak of the event ever again, they suffer from lingering paranoia. Late at night, they still hear footsteps outside their windows. They have this constant, creeping feeling of being watched. The physical monster might have disappeared at sunrise, but the trauma, the true lingering curse, followed them all the way home.
And to put the final perfect punctuation mark on this urban legend, the villagers did find one single thing left behind in the daylight. A lone, old wooden sign standing between the trees with dark red letters delivering an incredibly chilling warning. The next victims are already on their way. It tells us for sure that the curse is cyclical. The forest is literally just waiting to reset the trap for the next arrogant explorers who choose to ignore the village elders. So wrapping up this explainer, knowing the tropes, knowing the psychology of the trap, and understanding exactly how human curiosity constantly battles our own survival instincts, if you stood at the edge of that forest at midnight, would you have turned back, or would you have kept walking? Thank you so much for exploring the architecture of a nightmare with me. Keep learning, keep questioning, and maybe just stay out of the woods after dark.